Hello, this is Brian Rowe with Mythic MTG Tech. Today looking at City of Brass versus Mana Confluence and other cards where every word matters. This is a detailed rules dive today. We're going to be looking at each individual card and trying to evaluate which you should be using when deck building. To clarify, we are looking at functionally almost identical cards with minor differences that could really matter in play. This is about detailed reading of cards, diving in deep and understanding the intricacies of Magic rules to improve your gameplay. Outside the scope are those cards that are functionally the same. Llanowar Elves and Elvish Mystics are the same card with different names. Also outside the scope are things like Swords to Plowshare versus Path to Exile. These are fundamentally different cards. Similar effects, but very different. Also outside the scope are cards like Lord of Atlantis and Master of the Pearl Trident. The differences between these two are very large. The fact that you're giving your opponent a benefit almost all of the time. Very seldomly is it a positive thing to play a Lord of Atlantis over a Master of the Pearl Trident. So with each of these, I'm going to give you a few seconds to read through the cards. Try to figure out what the differences between them are and what use cases you would actually choose one over the other. If you want to skip forward about 25 seconds, you can move into my answer, but it's best if you actually try to read the cards first and determine what the differences are in those use cases. You will learn a lot more out of this process by diving into the cards and taking a guess first. If you need more time, please pause the video here. I'm moving on to the differences between Armadillo, Cloak, and Unflinching Courage. This is a classic one that has been around a long time. It's the difference between triggered abilities and static abilities. One of these cards, Armadillo Cloak, gives you life on the stack after most of combat damage has been done. The other, Unflinching Courage, creates an ability, lifelink, that gives you life while you're losing life during that resolution of damage. This matters a lot if you are ever low on life and could possibly die during the resolution of combat damage. It also matters if you've got creatures in your deck that have the ability lifelink already. Armadillo Cloak may actually give you significantly more life as you use it on a life-linking creature, where Unflinching Courage can save your life when you're really low on life because of the way that lifelink works. The next one we've got here is more subtle. This is probably the most subtle on the list. It's Active Treason versus Threatened. Okay, we're moving on to the differences between these. And you gain control of target creature either before or after the creature is untapped. If you're playing in an environment with Inspiration or cards like Mesmeric Orb that trigger when a user untaps a creature, it's extremely important. This is a much less likely case, but it definitely shows where even the order of operations inside of a spell matters. The third example that I've got here is Fork versus Reverberate. Take a little bit of time, figure out the differences, see if you can come up with some use cases between them. We're moving on here. The fundamental difference is the color of the copy that is made. If you're copying someone's Swords to Plowshares and they're playing pro-red creatures, it's a pretty obvious one here. Reverberate is often better post-sideboard in case your opponent has color hate specific cards. This one's a little less dynamic than the other ones on this list. I really like examples that challenge individuals with use cases where both sides have some significant benefits to them and some significant downsides. The next one here is one of the oldest ones on this list. It goes back to Alpha and Beta with Red Elemental Blast versus Ice Age's Pyroblast. The differences here are actually rather significant. I ran into a game recently where I was playing a Grixis deck that included Dax in it, and I had Red Elemental Blast main deck in Vintage. Pyroblast is what really should have been in the deck. Why? Number one, I was running Flusterstorms, and it's been known for a long time that Pyroblast is easier to up your storm count when you need it. But the more important use case here was the emblem on deck. Whenever you cast a spell that targets one or more permanents, gain control of those permanents. Pyroblast can target any permanent. This now allows you, after you've ultimated deck, to take control of any permanent your opponent has. If it's a blue permanent, it's going to get destroyed. But any other color permanent or colorless permanent, you're going to get control of. Red Elemental Blast does have a minor advantage that it's very difficult to misdirect it because the blue portion is what type of spell is eligible to be targeted. It's not just any spell. It must be a blue spell. What I like about this particular example is that both sides have pros and cons to them. Misdirection is played a significant amount in Vintage. I can see an argument for either side of this. I personally prefer Pyroblast, even though they're significantly less visually appealing than Red Elemental Blast in beta. This is one of the toughest ones on the list. City of Brass versus Mana Confluence. This is the example that really inspired me to do this video. In the same tournament that I ran into the Dak Faden situation, a friend of mine playing my Dredge deck ran into this situation. He was playing a deck that was full of City of Brasses, and he argued that Mana Confluence would have saved his life. He took 6 damage from Tangle Wires over a period of several turns. If those City of Brasses had been Mana Confluences, he would have taken 0 damage. Now, I built the deck because my history with City of Brass includes winning a single game where I was at 1 life and I had to Firestorm my opponent out. The damage from City of Brass is a triggered ability, so it goes on the stack, and before it resolves, you can put an instant on the stack above that that does damage to an opponent and kill them. It will check as a state-based effect before the triggered ability that's going to cause you damage actually resolves and kills you. This should not be confused with whether or not damage uses the stack in combat. An ability that causes damage is different than damage during resolution of combat. If you liked these very technical examples, I strongly recommend that you become a lawyer. These are the type of issues that you run into when you're reading statutes or contracts on a daily basis. If you like the video, please take out all your aggression on that subscribe button. I would love to have you as a follower. Thank you to everybody who's over there on Patreon supporting the channel. We got some great videos coming up in these next 2 weeks, including Death and Taxes, a EDH Green top 20 list, and something that I can't remember what it is for the second video in a row, but it's in production, so you'll see it soon.